Hello, today is Friday, February 6th, 2026. The date is actually 2626 today. Um, Today I'm going to read from Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation, the meditation for today. And yes, it is a Christian text, but I think there's truth within that. And I think that I shouldn't even say it's a Christian text because he doesn't specifically mention biblical scripture or anything, but Richard Rohr is a Roman Catholic priest who somehow has evaded being ostracized or defrocked from the Catholic faith. And I really think a lot of his things are very radical. Some of the stuff I don't agree with, or I don't resonate with, I should say. But this one really struck me, and I think that's the reason I want to share it with you today. So, even if you're not a believer or Christian, or even if you're agnostic or an atheist, I think there's something here to think about from any perspective. Anyway, the title of the meditation for today, and the subject has been Sabbath and Jubilee economics. And the title for the one today is There is More Than Enough. Actually, it was from yesterday. There is more than enough. And the writers from the CAC open it with, in a homily on the miracle of the loaves and fishes, Father Richard Rohr encourages us to pray for a worldview of abundance instead of scarcity. And it begins with Rohr's words. In the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey observed that one of the most universal patterns of highly effective people was that they had a worldview of abundance, while much of the world has a worldview of scarcity. We tend to get these worldviews very young, and they underlie almost everything. I myself tend to have a worldview of scarcity growing up as I did as a child of parents who were born in the Depression and the Kansas dust storms. A worldview of scarcity tells us to protect what we have because there's never enough to go around. It's a competitive win-lose worldview. It moves us toward anxiety, toward consumerism, and toward possessiveness because we don't want to lose what little we have, even if what we have is really more than enough. But there's another worldview, the worldview of abundance. Sooner or later, we have to choose it because it doesn't come naturally. I'm convinced that it's the worldview of the gospel. It's a big world out there. There are lots of options and opportunities. There's always another creative way to look at things. Let's be honest. Do we remember to look at life that way? Most people are afraid that they don't have enough. Of course, if we're dependent upon a finite source, one limited amount of money, one limited intellect, one limited life, it's easy to look at life in terms of scarcity, convincing ourselves that there isn't enough. There isn't enough of goodness. There isn't enough even of God. The worldview of abundance depends upon us recognizing that we are in touch with an infinite source. If we've never made contact with our infinite source, we will be stingy, even selfish. We will guard and hoard the portion we have. This affects much of our politics and policies in this country. We're always afraid that someone else is taking what we have earned as if we had earned it entirely by ourselves. Most of it has been given to us, yes, by our work, but also by grace and freedom and the choices of many other people, almost despite ourselves. Jesus represents the worldview of abundance in every one of his multiplication miracles and stories. There's always the making of much out of little, and there's always baskets left over. That's the only possible message. There's plenty. If we learn to be creative, if we learn to be imaginative, if we learn to be a little less selfish, there's always another way to look at it and another way to make sure all are fed. Maybe a worldview of abundance is something we'll only fully experience when we learn to draw upon an infinite source. If the source is infinite, we are infinite. If the source is finite, of course, we're finite too. um, like I said, I read this and thought, this isn't specifically Christian or even theist in a way, because ultimate source, we're all looking for that infinite source. the wonder of the world as it exists. I mean, there's so many things you can think about, but anyway, I just thought it was impactful, and it speaks a lot to our society today. And I had a kind of chuckle when he opened with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because I was embedded in my secular job when that exploded on the scene, and it just ran rampant through the company I worked for, and we had lots of workshops on it and all use planning things, and it's kind of funny because it ended up being highly lucrative for Stephen Covey and the people who started the Franklin Planner, because they kind of merged together. And But anyway, it was a worldview, and I really resonated with a lot of what Stephen Covey had said, and the guy that did the Franklin Planner, I can't think of his name offhand, because they had similar worldviews, and looking at what you have and focusing your life on the things that you say are important to you, because we tend not to. The other thing I was thinking about in this is how much our capitalistic worldview is a worldview of scarcity, as is communism. That's a scarcity. And communism is different than socialism. I mean, much of what Jesus describes as a community life, and what the Bible discusses as community life, that began to grow immediately after Jesus' death, was a communal living, which is a social living, sharing everything, regardless of how much each individual has. They all share so that all may have enough. Which is antithetical to a capitalistic society, and in some respects is antithetical to a communist society, because in a communist society, those who rule tend to fix things so that they get more than everyone else, and convince everyone that there's not enough to go around. And so everyone suffers except for those at the top. So anyway, but it does become a competitive win-lose worldview. This also made me think of someone I know who once said something about one political party wants to take away their money, and and that's a capitalistic thinking, is that it's their money and that they earned it themselves. And yet our lives are so interdependent upon everybody else in the world. Natural resources, labor, even the food on our table. I mean, sometimes when I go to eat something, I guess it's kind of a prayer. I try to stop and think and look at the things on my plate, and try to imagine all the people that made those things possible, including nature, the world. Because I mean, growing things, harvesting things, farming things, processing things, packaging it, producing it, stocking shelves, working in stores, and then even those who deal with the aftermath of that, and the trail all the way to dumps and recycling and all that stuff. Our lives are inextricably interwoven with everyone else in the world, and so in a way, nothing is just ours individually, but it's ours collectively. So anyway, it's just something that this really made me think about as I was reading it again, and reminding myself to try to have a world, and not have a world, but to try to get myself to start thinking about the good things that I have around me, because only in trying to look specifically for those things will I find the strength to get through each day and overcome a lot of the awful things that are happening in this world. Look for the good, look for the abundance, and look for ways that you can share. Because I think, as he closed in his homily about a worldview of abundance is something we can only fully experience when we learn to draw upon an infinite source. When you think that of the source it being infinite, that there is enough for everyone if we only take what we need. And of course, that's one of the biggest issues. And again, over and over again, those messages resonate in the Hebrew scriptures as well as the Christian scriptures, even as far back as looking at, as an example, one of the stories about Moses and the people in the wilderness and how manna was sent to them to keep them from starving in the desert, but they were given specific instructions that each person should only gather what they need. And what they need was not predefined by authorities or said, each person only gets 200 grams or quarter of a pound or whatever. It says each person is to collect only what they need. And what each person needs may be different from the person next to them. But as long as they only gather what they need, everyone will have enough. And that is true even in this world. The other thing I was thinking of is the stories of the loaves and fishes that occur in 2 of the Gospels in the New Testament of the Christian scriptures. And in one of them, and I can't think specifically which one, all these people, thousands of people, it says there's 5,000 men, but there's women and children too, following him. He tells the disciples to feed them, and they say, well, we don't have enough even for ourselves. Tell them to go into the towns and buy something themselves. And Jesus looks at them and just says, feed them. And so they start passing out what they have. They find they gather a few things and they start passing it out. And I mean, one thought is, there was truly a miracle and things multiplied in the baskets. And the other is that the real miracle is people started sharing what they had. And some people had more than others, but everybody shared what they could. And then everyone had enough. And in fact, they had more than enough because there was stuff left over. And again, those are stories for us today to change our worldview, to stop looking at what we don't have. And it's hard because everything in our world, a capitalistic world, is pushed toward that. All the advertising, if you only had this, your life would be better. If you only had this, you'd look younger. If you only had this, you'd be happier. We're just deluged with scarcity to try to get us to want more. But if we just say, it's enough. So, hope this gives you something to think about. Hope you can start thinking about what you do have and what you can share and how your life is interwoven with everyone else around you, and the importance for us to live in a way that builds community. So, my thoughts for the day. Hope it gives you something to think about, and hope to talk to you again soon.